Welcome to Big Performance Podcast, and I have a great guest today, Saurabh Jain. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do.
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, from a bit of context, I'm a software engineer by trade. Did a tech startup when I was young, sold that off to Telstra, which is like the large local telco, like an AT&T kind of here in Australia. Then spent about 10 years in sales, kind of back before it was called SaaS, it was called ASP. So kind of hosted applications back then. Then about 10 years more on the technical side of my career. So, led software dev teams, implementation teams, support teams, and then kind of did it all. So I did sales and product build and support as well. Then CIO for a large public listed company, staff in about 52 countries. And then for about 7, 8 years ago, got my dream job, CEO of a publicly listed company called Urbanize. Was there for about 5 years, CEO for the last three. We grew that to about $100 million business over that kind of 3, 4 year period. Um, then had a bit of a lifestyle change. The wife and I, we had twins. They're 2.5 years old, so 2.5 years ago. Um, and it's very hard to be a dad and be present at home and be a CEO in 13 countries, traveling 2 weeks a month. So ended up kind of finishing up the CEO role, sold out my equity, did okay out of that. And originally the plan was to semi-retire. Like there's all this stuff outside work that I really wanted to explore a lot more. I've always been into meditation, so I wanted to kind of spend a lot more time doing that, doing some meditation courses, just understanding myself, understanding my mind a lot better. So I got deep into that. I do about 100 days of that every year right now. And now I'm on about 6 different company boards. So my kind of niche is mostly in the tech space, but not all my boards are tech. They're businesses, usually around the $5 to $10 million of revenue, that the CEO founder just wants an extra person around, or a board member, or an advisor, just to kind of help them on that journey. And probably the most exciting one I'm doing right now, I'm the exec chair for a company called Opal, OPYL, publicly listed here in Australia. And they're an AI Medtech startup, and they're doing some pretty exciting things.
Cool. This is an interesting story. Nowadays,
Hmm.
it's very unique because from a software development start, you went into business development and
Yeah.
then kind of combined the two experiences into a CIO job and
Hmm.
then developed it further, accumulating the expertise. And now you have advisory roles in a few companies. One of them is a software as a service AI company that
Hmm.
works with improving clinical trials. So
Yeah.
that company has a base that they have access to, and AI solution that can work with the data.
Totally. So probably a couple of things there. So it's rare, and I kind of know why, but it's kind of sad that it is that a technical person doesn't move into the commercialization space enough. I think unfortunately there's not enough people that kind of have that Venn diagram between building great tech and figuring out how to sell it, how to market it, and how to kind of generate some revenue out of it. That was my little niche when I first started, because I found often the salespeople didn't understand the tech enough, or the tech people didn't understand how to sell enough, and I was that kind of the guy in the middle, and I did quite well there. And I think what being a CIO, then more so like a CEO of a public listed company, that helped me figure out like the people management behind it. And that's my niche now. It's I'm a technical person that knows how to commercialize tech, and I spend a lot of time on the people management side of things. And that's what I do in a lot of these board roles or these advisory roles, is help people kind of solve those three problems.
Well, your position is safe because nobody gonna solve all the 3 points anywhere soon. people,
Oh,
sales, and technology, and all at
oh,
the same
totally.
time.
It's a very very small niche, and that's why I'm not sure to work. But that's actually what most organizations try to do in the SaaS space today, right? You build some really really good tech. You got to figure out who's going to actually give you some money for it, and then you want to figure out like how do I build this team around this so it actually does well.
I see.
Hmm.
I don't think it's small. It's an intersection of the three biggest issues, like on the market everywhere,
Yeah,
and you're right in between. So I think
totally.
it's
I
a
think there's a
very
yeah.
targeted position, but not
Mm.
small. I would not say that.
So I wouldn't say small in terms of the need, but small in terms of the number of people that actually fit that gap.
Hmm.
Because I don't think enough people kind of know all three. And then the other part, more on the people management or managing myself. Like I'm a meditator. Like I probably spend more time doing that than I do almost anything else these days. So just that deep understanding of myself and how I function and how I'm motivated and why I am the way I am. It helps a lot on the actual coaching with other CEOs and founders to help kind of have that lens about, okay, why are you doing this, like what's motivating you, what's the core underlying belief or psychology or thing that you're actually chasing. Having been a founder, it's always a lot easier to kind of connect with other founders and to connect with other CEOs. And I tend to find that, like I'm sure every CEO will say this isn't the case, but it so is. Like CEOs kind of only respect other CEOs and other founders because we've actually done something great and amazing themselves. And having been that and understanding myself quite well, I kind of do well on the coaching side of things as well.
It's interesting. I think somewhere you mentioned that you have done a 100-day silent meditation. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, totally. So, correction. So, I did two 45-day courses, and I did like a 10-day course in the middle. So, it was 100 days over the last year. So, I've got my next 45-day course booked in January, so in about 6, 7 months' time. So, it's one of those things that I've always kind of done. Even when I was a CEO of a public company, I'd still do like 10-day courses. I do them about 3 days, 3 times a year. So what you do in the longer 45-day course, so there's no reading, no writing, you're away from the wife, away from the kids. You wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, you go to sleep at 9 p.m. It's a kind of organization called Vipassana, like a not-for-profit, 200 centers around the world where you can go and practice. And you just sit and meditate hour after hour after hour. Um, it's kind of like learning a new language. Like if you actually want to learn a new language, you got to like completely immerse yourself and do nothing else. And that's what you do for those 45 days. You probably get about 500 hours of meditation in. Um, and after a while, you kind of get good at it.
How do they provide kind of guiding through this journey? Because if I, for example, if I go and I have little knowledge about meditation,
Mm,
and there is like 45 days of work, yeah,
yeah,
we can say it's internal work, but who will guide me?
totally. So you don't start with a 45 day. You start with like there's a 10-day intro. So 10-day silent retreat. That one is like super structured. Like every hour there's instructions. They tell you what to do. There's discourses every night. So that's more for people starting on the journey. And after you do like a bunch of them, you can do a 20. Then after that, you can do a 230s. And after you've done 230s, you can start doing 45 days and hopefully one day 60-day courses. So the 45-day ones are not as structured because by then you kind of know how to meditate. You're quite self-disciplined. You're kind of like your own little master in these kind of journeys. But the 10-day intro ones, they're super, super structured. So they totally guide you the entire journey.
Cool. I'm interested. I'm interested.
Hmm.
How do they incorporate physical activity into that? I heard about walking meditation, but anything above just walking?
Yeah, so with this one specifically, and there's like there's a million different types of meditation, but the problem to solve in this one is like why are we unhappy in life? Like why do we suffer? Like, what is it about us that makes us constantly chase pleasurable feelings and avoid unpleasant feelings? And almost everything you do in life is actually driven by that deep, deep motivation. And the reason that you do that is just the way that the mind and the matter interact with each other. There's a part of your mind that's always kind of craving, asking for more, asking for more. And there's a part of your mind which is always trying to avoid pain, avoid pain, avoid pain, try to get more comfortable. So you need to really go to a really deep part of the subconscious mind and literally like retrain your brain. But the problem is you can't sit down and do that, right? Because normally the mind is talking, 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 talking. So what you do for the first one third of any of these courses, so in a 10-day course, it's 3 days, and 45-day course, it's 15 days, is you just stop the mind from talking. So that, by the way, that's totally achievable. Like I probably haven't heard my inner discourse for a couple of years now. Like that internal rhetoric is completely gone in my mind. Um, so that's goal number one, is get the mind to be completely silent. They say for like an hour. I haven't done an hour, but to keep the mind completely silent for as long as you can. And to make the mind completely silent, you actually have to be physically still. So that's why things like the exercise and the walking meditation and some of those kind of things don't really gel with this technique. This technique, the mind is completely still, the body's completely still, and then you learn the proper, what they call vipassana, the proper technique about how to like purify the mind and get rid of some of these kind of elements out of one's mind.
I see.
Mm. It's one of those things
So
that you got to experience. Otherwise, it's like really hard to explain to someone else. But the end result is you actually end up having full control over your own mind. You get to control what thoughts you have. You got to control how you act in the world. And and the other kind of side benefit, it's not the goal, but it's so a side benefit, is it just makes you smarter. Like imagine if you went to like a fat camp, right? Or you went to the gym for 12 hours a day for 100 days a year. You've done your 10,000 hours. You did an hour every morning, an hour every night. You'll be physically really, really fit. You get that, but you get the mental version. Like the mind just becomes very, very sharp. You remember things. You can process things. You just build that muscle.
how does silent meditation translate into working better with CEOs and being able to coach them in their particular situation, apart
Hmm.
from you becoming smarter yourself?
Totally. So a couple of things that I'll kind of say is when you go on one of these long courses, like you just get rid of stuff that you've struggled with your entire life. So you might have struggled with you might not have felt good enough. You might have had issues with your parents. You might have issues with your wife, your kids. Someone you love might have left you or passed away. See, normally most of us kind of have all this damage that's in our mind that we've just kind of accrued over time. So when you're freed from that, you actually don't get stuck in your mind. When you're sitting with somebody, you can actually spend a bit of time and try to get into their mind and start thinking about, why are they saying what they're doing, what's happening in their world. And it's not about you projecting your needs, wants, and desires onto them, but you actually totally get to understand them. So, simple example, like on the CEO side of things or the coaching side of things, like I totally think, like I totally won the game, right? I was 41, no longer have to work full time, super successful. But most CEOs still have this need that they still need to prove themselves. And so often you'll find a coach, and this is more the ineffective ones, they'll spend all the time talking about themselves and how great they are. Because they're still like, oh my God, I want to portray to the outside world that I'm succeeding, though I'm a scared little boy inside. And when you're not a scared little child on the inside, you can actually spend your time on the other person and not on yourself. The other part as well is because you do get smarter, you have all this extra mental capacity. Because normally talking takes up all of our mental load, right? Or all of our cognitive load. But because the mind is not talking otherwise, you get to spend a lot more time to actually understand, why is that person looking at me like that? What are they actually thinking? What are the next five or six logical parts of this conversation that I need to start processing and need to start thinking about? Does that kind of make sense?
Totally. You're saying us about when you release past trauma, it lowers your level of social anxiety and thinking about yourself too much, and you can relate better to what happens to the person in front of you, and you can be more invested in the conversation, so you perform better.
Oh, that's exactly it. I mean, the one line summary is, it's hard to understand someone else if you're still caught in your own mind and caught in your own thoughts. Because otherwise, for example, if you and I are chatting, if I was caught in my own thoughts, I'd be replaying an argument I had with my wife last night. I'd be replaying an argument I had with the staff member. I'd be worried about another meeting that I've got to go to after this. But I'm not thinking about any of that. I can be in this one moment, having this one conversation, so I can really be fully present here.
One of the life hacks that address this situation from the other side, for me personally, would be to remind myself that when there is a person I'm talking to, it's not about myself all the time.
Mm,
Because part of the social anxiety is like, oh, how does the person I'm talking to uh, take what I've just said? How do they perceive
yeah,
me in this context, in this scenario? Do they think less of me? Do they approve? Do they acknowledge? And this relates back to the not healthy coaching scenario, where the person is going in telling about how good they are, and this indeed tells us a lot about that person. They just coming up to you and saying, hey, do you want to validate me? Here is how great I am. Here is what
totally.
I've done.
Yep, totally. And I think what you're explaining is something that's deeply human. I mean, one of the reasons that we survive as a species is because we're like really good at like working together as a whole bunch. Like that's why humanity does well, right? Like a whole bunch of people can get together, 100 people can solve a single problem together, or an entire nation or a continent or whatnot. But for that to work on the micro level, we have to need each other, and we constantly seek approval and validation from each other. Because otherwise it wouldn't work, right? If we all were super independent and super confident, it would actually not work. Um, but that emotion is actually purely optional. You can totally pull that out of your mind and not feel that level of anxiety, and just feel this deep inner confidence that I am okay the way I am. And I hate to tell you, Alex, you can't intellectualize your way there, because the emotions that cause that are buried so deep inside the mind. They're caught in a part of the mind that doesn't understand language. So you can't talk your way out of it. Talking kind of helps and therapy kind of helps. But because it's buried so deep, deep inside the mind, you got to pull it out from the root. And when you do, you no longer seek that social validation anymore. Um, and then when you're not there to prove yourself anymore, from a coaching perspective, you get to spend all the time on the other person and not so much on you.
I understand that from the brain perspective. If I think about it, I look at it as a competition between our happiness hormones, because there is one hormone that um, is engaged where when I am evaluating my position in the society. So what
Mm,
is my level? Do the people bow before me?
yep.
Next one is the dopamine with like, did I achieve what I want? And the next one would be the hormone of social connection. And when people prefer
Mm,
one or the other hormone too much, so some people go after super achieving and doing the
yep.
things above all else. Others will be hooked
Mm,
up on the their relative position in society, trying to get fame, trying to get influence. And the third clan would be after the social relationships. And what I think meditation is helping us to achieve is to kind of pull out of all of them and to balance it out, and be balanced within our pursuit of this happiness hormones, so we
Yeah,
don't go overboard with one of them.
totally. And look, it does that. And it does something a bit deeper as well. Is so the reason that we chase these happiness hormones or we avoid negative ones is that we have this deep, deep physical addiction to these hormones. Like you want dopamine, right? Well, right. You want it again. You want it again. You want it again. Like you want it constantly, nonstop. It's like a drug, albeit it's something that the body produces. Um, so what often, but by the way, there's something like some people have a greater propensity to get addicted to these bodily emotions, and some people have less. The people that have more propensity to get addicted to this or need this stuff or become super high achievers, right? Because they totally need this validation or need all this money or need all this social proof. It's those people that are more deeply connected or driven by the needs of the body. So you'll see that if you when you think about it, you'll know that person that they're the person that either does drugs or drinks a lot or does extreme sports or is constantly seeking that endorphin rush. So people like that have a greater tendency to get addicted to these emotions, and everybody's addicted to some stage. But what meditation does, if done properly and done succinctly and done consistently, it helps reduce that addiction. So it just turned the volume dial down on some of those kind of things. So you can totally still enjoy all those things, but you're not as driven by them. And you have a lot more kind of cognitive control over yourself and cognitive control over, what your body is asking you to do.
Cognitive control over what your body asks you to do. Help me
So,
understand that.
so have you ever felt it like you don't want to do something, like you don't want to eat that chocolate cake, it's horrible, it's bad for you, it's going to give cause you diabetes one day, but you just have no control. You just got to go do it anyway. Like often the body will decide it wants something, and no matter what we intellectually tell ourselves, like it's going to happen anyway. Or you think, okay,
Yeah,
I'm not going to
I
have a
kind
drink
of
tonight.
understand
Yeah,
sugar cravings for sure.
yeah, totally. So it's the exact same, but it's the opposite. We actually get to control it. Where sugar cravings or alcohol or lust or greed or anger or ego, any of those deep, deep emotions, you can actually choose to control them because all of them come from a deep part of the mind, which is deeply connected to the body. And when they surface up and bubble up to the top of the mind, that's when you actually get the choice to whether engage or not engage. And most people, like we've got this type of ADHD where we actually can't hold on to something for very long and can't actually process a thought or a need or a desire. And we just jump to acting on it straight away.
Mm. And meditation helps us get thinking between the desire and our pursuit of this desire.
So it gives you
How
a bit of
how
space.
do we install the thinking bit into that?
Yeah, totally. Because most often, like with a dog, right? A dog has no time between stimulus and response. It just happens straight away. But hopefully, we're a bit more evolved. And what you do is you try to extend out that time a bit. So you have a few moments, right, to actually think about how I want to react to this.
Would you recommend meditation for all people in business, or there is some kind of people you would say
Mm.
no, meditation is not for you. You do gym, for example.
Look, it's hard. I cannot, like, the first time I did a 10-day course, like 20 years ago, oh my God, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I don't even know why I went again. But even to spend 45 days nonstop without talking, without reading, no writing, no internet, no phone, no interaction with your family, that is insanely difficult. So you got to have like a really high level of self discipline if you're going to try to do some of these things. Um, and some people just don't have that, right? Some people just don't have that strong desire to succeed or strong desire or self discipline to do it. I think everyone will benefit. Some people, a couple minutes a day is all they can do. 5 minutes a day, it's greater than zero. It's better than nothing. They'll still get some benefit out of it. And then you just want to balance it with all parts of your life, right? Like you got to do this, you got to eat well, you got to exercise, you got to have good, social relationships. This is just one of the many, many things one needs to do to succeed. The reason I found it a lot more helpful in business. So when I was a CEO, and I did back then, I only did 10-day courses because like a month off is way too long. I actually asked one of my board members about I want to do a 45-day course. I said, yeah, I'll do it over Christmas, quiet time. He said, great idea, Saurabh. Just don't come back. So it is rare in business to be able to take that kind of time off. But what I found with those 10-day silent retreats is it gave me that time to actually think. Like, am I as a CEO doing the right thing? Are we in the right market? Are we chasing the right customers? Do I have the right people on the team? Because normally, if you're a busy exec, you go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, and you don't get like a week or so just to actually sit back and contemplate. Like, what is happening with this company? What is happening with my life? Are things working well? Are they not working well? You don't get that time to really kind of process those deep thoughts and deep emotions.
What do you think about people who do not have internal monologue at all? Because there are people like that do not hear the internal voice, internal narrator who goes
Yeah.
over everything they do or want to do.
They are the luckiest people in the entire world. Look, it took me like 100 days of meditation to get rid of my internal monologue, and just life is so much better. Like I'm no longer a victim or trapped in my own mind anymore. So if you're born with that, oh my god, you're like the luckiest person ever. I wasn't, so I had to work super hard, and I've got to do an hour every morning, an hour every night, just to maintain it, to make sure that internal monologue doesn't creep back in.
Do you think it might be one of the dilemmas that our better half uh, are having troubles with? For example, women who have curly hair want straight hair, and women who have naturally straight hair, they buy curls and make the curly hair.
Yeah.
uh, because I'm one of those people who does not have internal monologue. I never had,
Mm,
so
yeah.
I cannot really imagine how it is that in my head would be another person that sits there and narrates the things that I'm doing. For me, it's like
Mm,
crazy. Would I
yeah.
want to have that person? I don't know. Maybe it improved. It would have helped me in some other parts of my life where I struggled. For example, communication. If there is a person telling me stuff, maybe I would have been better at expressing stuff that I want to talk to people about. Because if I don't
Mm,
have the narrative, I need to exert myself to put the words into combinations
yeah.
that in pursuit of some of my ideas which nobody voices up for me.
Mm. So I've experienced both, and you are so much better without a monologue. Um, let me just challenge you. Let me ask you a question. What language do you think in?
English.
English. So as soon as you think in a language, you actually have an internal monologue. It might be very quiet, and it might not chatter a lot, but you probably have something there that helps you process thoughts or think about things. But what you probably have is you probably have an huge amount of control over your internal monologue. So it doesn't go crazy off in different directions. You can probably bring it back to what you're actually focused on. And if you have that, oh my God, you're like the most gifted person ever. Like you'd never want to go and have an internal monologue. So the analogy I'll give is just imagine if your mind would think about 5 or 6 different things every minute. Every 10 seconds it goes to a different topic and you have no control over it. I mean, that's what someone who has ADHD has, right? And like you totally don't want that. The fact that you have the ability to control your mind and thoughts in your monologue, that's very, very fortunate. Don't go the other way.
Well, I do have ADHD as well. Maybe that's why I don't have the internal monologue. I do
Mm,
know that I do not think in Russian because it's
mm,
easy for, which is my native language.
hmm.
And it is easier for me to start conversation in English than it is in Russian. And if
Yeah,
I am faced with a need to switch, I would be, I would need to take a break. So
yeah,
when I come into a meeting with a Russian person, I need to sit myself down and give
mm,
myself a couple of minutes to remember that way of communication.
yeah,
So that's why I presume that I think in English.
yeah. Oh,
But
that
yeah,
kind of
there are other challenges with the being more prone to jump from subject to subject, and
mm,
uh, hence I had to learn meditation to be able to slow down and
yeah.
be choosing the things that I decide to think about.
Hmm. Totally. And the other part of just on the language side, I mean, some people are just able to communicate with words better, and some people are just not able to communicate as much. And that's totally a skill that one builds when they're young and through life as well. And that actually has no correlation to the internal monologue. The internal monologue is actually quite different. So even if you did have that narration all the time, it wouldn't necessarily increase or improve your ability to communicate with other people.
Hmm. What do you think about this hypothesis? So you mentioned how through the meditation you managed to stop the internal
Hmm.
monologue,
Yeah.
and in the modern society we are faced with like eternal distractions. There is social
Yeah.
media, there are people that want to chat to me, and there is like exquisite collection of videos on YouTube, so I can
Yep.
be distracted like all the time.
Mm.
And my hypothesis is that when people go to things like Vipassana and they have to get rid of all their digital distractions in the time that they are not provided with new stuff, they are running out of their own thoughts that they
Mm.
needed to think about but never did.
Yep.
The things they needed to process, but they never had a moment of not being exposed to this screens environment. So when we go to meditation and learn these practices, we give us the way and the time to hear us out and catch up on what is going in our lives.
Mm.
And that is kind of the gateway and like the direct way to being more present in your life.
Look, I think that's spot on. As soon as you reduce the amount of input and stimuli into your brain starts to literally unwinds all the stuff in backlog that it hasn't processed properly yet. It kind of bubbles up to the surface. You process it again, and then if you react really badly, it actually unfortunately gets very deep into the mind. If you don't react, you're going to get food of it. But one by one, all your historical things will come up that you haven't properly processed. This kind of happens a bit when we go to sleep, when your mind just kind of wanders away into all sorts of different things and does whatever the mind does. But yeah, that's totally a thing when you stop talking, you stop adding stuff into the mind. You get the space to process some of the historical things.
Makes sense what you say about the sleep. I heard a an idea that says that the more new information we get. So, for example, I'm learning new skill, and I'm getting through a
Mm.
lot of reading on that. The more I consume, the more sleepy I get, just because the brain gets a lot of information that it needs to process and make some of this big scope of information, make some of it permanent in my brain, so it
Mm.
makes me sleepy. So I lie down, and the brain has a way to store some of the information.
Yeah, kind of. Well, the way that I've experienced it is, yeah, totally. I mean, the harder you work any muscle, the brain, the body, like you get tired, right? You just get exhausted, so you need to rest a bit more. Um, I don't know necessarily if sleeping actually increases your ability to store memories. I think what it is I think it's the actually the other way around, or that's what I've experienced, or that's what I've observed in my own mind, is by being rested, you are better at storing memories. Not by going to sleep after you've done something, you're better at storing that memory that you've just processed. Because the way it works is, I mean, have you ever observed how your own memories work and how they're stored and how they're retrieved?
I don't think I have too much experience with that, but I
Okay.
know some connection with emotion.
Kind of. So it's a bit more complex. All so you got five senses, right? Or six if you include the mind. So every sense actually stores its memories in a different part of the mind. So anything you physically feel gets stored in one spot. Anything you hear, anything you smell, anything you taste, anything you see, and they all get stored really, really differently. So, for example, anything that you feel. So think about the last time you had like a needle, right? um, you actually can't remember it. You can't remember what that felt like because where that gets stored is in a very deep part of the mind that you can't consciously recall from. If you think about the last something that tastes really good, you can totally recall that straight away, and you can literally almost taste that again because that obviously gets stored in a much much higher part of the mind. Because I figured taste evolved after touch, so it's probably in a more evolved part of the mind. But everything that you see or that you visually remember, that's obviously been the most recent thing that's evolved, and it only stores every visual memory is only stored in about 3 or 4 second slots. So the analogy that I often give is if you think about when you had breakfast this morning, if you think about the start of the meal and you hold on to that thought really tightly and you try to play that video, you'll find in your mind's eye, after about 3 seconds, you'll completely have skipped the whole middle part of your meal and you would have gone straight to the end of the meal. You actually can't hold on to a visual memory for more than about 3 seconds. So the way it works is memories are connected to memories, and that's how you recall them. So all these 3 second memories are stored in random order in your mind, but the way that you recall them is the connection between them. So now when you learn a new skill, if you're fully conscious, fully aware, fully rested, the mind isn't talking, that actually gets slotted into the mind and it gets anchored to something that's very high in your conscious memory, and that's how you recall it. And that's why if something happened and you weren't really paying attention, you sometimes you can't consciously recall it, but if you distract yourself 3 hours later it will come back up and you'll suddenly remember, just because the mind happened to process through a part of the mind that had that memory. Um, so that's why I reckon you can't it's about being rested, not sleeping afterwards. And just a little side note, the reason you can't remember your dreams very well is actually all your dreams are totally stored in your memory. But that last memory that anchors it to your consciousness, that's just not there, or that's very, very weak. And that's why you can't go deep and recall them.
Mm. I think that what you're saying is very reminiscent of what I was reading up on the
Hmm.
literature of skill acquisition, where people learn better when they have change of actively learning and not doing anything. And what
Hmm.
researchers found was that after doing something, solving a task, and having this time where you don't need to do anything, what brain
Yep.
actually does is it goes through the steps of solving the puzzle, but
Hmm.
in a different order, from the
Hmm.
last thing you did all the way up to the first thing you did.
Yep. That I've not experienced that, but I can imagine that totally being a thing because the steps in solving that puzzle is actually stored in random order in the mind. And as soon as you've finished it, if you leave your mind blank and not busy in the next task, I'm sure the mind continues to replay that, and that just strengthens the memory, or that strengthens the understanding of it.
I want to ask you about your approach to coaching. Obviously, you have a vast knowledge and experience in working out it for yourself. But when
Hmm.
you are approached with a coaching scenario with a C-level executive, what would be the the steps that you will go together with this person?
Yeah. So often at the start, it's about trying to actually deeply understand what's going on in this person's mind. So they might come to me and be like, "Hey, I had this problem, had this salesman, this didn't work out, or I had, the CFO came back and told me this, and I didn't like it, I didn't understand it, or this client said this." And often the core issue is actually not that. It's about five or six layers deeper in that person's being, mind, or the way they operate, or the way they do what they do. And so my kind of role there is to actually go help figure that out for them. It's somewhere between being a coach and a therapist sometimes, but help them figure out like why is it why is it they do what they do, why is it they react how they react, and then how is the outside world perceiving that, and then how is that being kind of echoed or mirrored back to them. So the kind of steps you go through, you find out a lot of information, a lot of clarifying kind of questions, and then you literally kind of put yourself in their place and be like, okay, now why are they doing this, and help and just talk them through that. That's more the complex things, and then 50% of it's just more the mundane things. Hey, I need to set up a sales commission. How do I do that? Or I've got this financial report. How do I read that? Or I've got this new product. I want to commercialize. How do we figure out the pricing? That's more the transactional stuff that probably a lot of other people can do. But I've done it before, so I can just kind of guide them through that. So it kind of falls into those two buckets.
And I would bet that the C-level executives do not really distinguish between those two buckets themselves, and they can kind of give you like everything what's happening, and you can kind of separate it and give advice
Mm.
accordingly.
Totally. They almost always come into the second bucket with a really cerebral question or problem or something very tactical, or that's because that's what's on top of their mind. That's what's causing them grief. We almost always start there. But nine times out of ten, there's a deeper thing that one needs to talk about.
I get it. I get it from the experience working with uh, my my coach.
Mm.
Yeah, because I totally had questions about business, the relationships that I need to make for business, and we ended up figuring out the underlying relationship issues that I needed to work on.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it was definitely the other bucket to what I was expecting this relationship to fall into.
Yep. And that's a sign of a great coach that help you kind of talk through that and kind of come to that conclusion.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Hmm. The other thing we should probably talk about is probably out of the six companies I work for. Probably my most exciting one is this Medtech AI business. Um,
Tell me about the relationship between the two brands that you have. So you
hmm.
have
So we have Opal. Opal's the parent company, and the product that we take out to market is Trial Key. Actually, at some point, we'll get rid of Opal and just call it Trial Key. Um, so what we did, and this took about 3 years, and we have a brilliant CTO that built the tech for us, is we got 350,000 clinical trials. We picked off 700 variables off each trial. Things like who's funding it, where is it, what's the ingestion method, is it a needle, is it a cream, what's the dosage. We're adding compounds and molecules there. Picked up all those variables like through our own custom large language model. And then we try to build a predictive algorithm. Actually, what leads to an actual trial succeeding or not? And now, with about 90% accuracy, we can tell you whether a clinical trial will succeed before it even starts. Which sounds super crazy, but it kind of makes sense. Like all the knowledge about medicine is actually all in these clinical trials that have happened over the last 20 years. And we've completely synthesized that into one kind of AI machine. So that's what we kind of got to January, February this year. We launched the product. We have our first set of paying customers. Small company, only about maybe a dozen, maybe 14, 15 people in the business right now. And then we're figuring out use cases for this. So one use case that we do right now is we use this for investments. So right now it's just the CTO and I investing in pharmaceutical companies. Super simple. You buy a share, you buy a public company's stock before they announce a trial succeeding, and then you sell it afterwards. And that's been an insanely profitable. Like we're probably up 150% for the last quarter. Um, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Albeit we've only got a couple of proof points. We need to probably do this for another year just to make sure this actually works. But that's one use case that we do. And the other use case that we have now as well, and our first set of paying customers, is people that are designing clinical trials. We've built now a generative AI model that'll actually build a clinical trial for them. So you might say, look, I am doing research in ADHD. I've developed a drug. It's a phase 3 trial, and we'll actually generate a lot of the actual trial synopsis for you. So we'll tell you how many patients you should have, what sites you should be in, what the inclusion exclusion criteria should be in, what the different endpoints, i.e., what the different problems you're trying to solve for should be. And we pick the optimal ones because we know which of those most likely lead to success. And then at the end of that, we'll actually tell you the probability of success of this trial as well. So it's probably out of all the companies I'm working for, it's probably the most exciting one right now.
For sure. How did you acquire the access to the trial information? And
Yes.
were you thinking about adding the uh, general medical information as well, or like you have enough data already?
Yeah, totally. So all this data is actually publicly available on clinicaltrials.gov because anybody that wants to register with the FDA has to upload this info. So that's where we got it from. What we did was more around the curation because our data is pretty crap. So we spent a lot of time making our own private data sources, connecting them together. And then we supplemented that with a lot of other kind of data sources that we found or created ourselves, or we have some researchers which are constantly adding to it. Um, we think we don't need general medical journals and those kind of things. That the actual trial information is the best data set that you can get because more often than not, you can actually figure out what the outcome actually was of that trial. Where a lot of medical journals, they're very, very early phase research. And the outcome of those molecules, those medicines, those ingestion methods, those therapies is not completely known yet.
I see. What is the level of innovation that the company needs to go through so that your AI algorithm cannot really tell you the answer? So I understand that there is like the data that it is based upon. So what is the level of innovation I need
Mm,
to go through so that the data is not actually comparable for it? For
totally, totally.
example, the like gene therapy, is that in the data?
So it's a common question. What about like novel drugs? Like, what if someone's doing something for the first time? Um, so a couple of things that we've found is being novel does not actually affect the chance of success. It's not this great thing that actually makes it's more likely you're going to succeed. Most of the things that get solved in medicine actually happen over 10 years. It just takes a decade of research and effort and trying different things before someone has like an overnight breakthrough. It just takes time. Like even with the COVID vaccines, there's a whole bunch of mRNA, research for a whole bunch of time before that, and then they just brought it together with some vaccines. Um, so that's one thing. The other thing that we've found, phase two. So phase one, you just check it out for safety. Phase two, you check it out for efficacy. Does it actually do something good? Phase three, you do that efficacy at scale. So where we get at 90% correct is more so in phase three, because really efficacy got proved in phase two. Now you got to do it in at scale, and in that kind of case, the actual clinical trial design is actually so much more important than the core underlying medicine. Which again sounds kind of strange, but that's just what the data shows. Because I reckon there's heaps of amazing drugs and therapies that had like a really bad clinical trial design that ended up failing, not because of the medicine, but because of the actual trial design. And even if you have an amazing trial, if the medicine doesn't work, it still doesn't work. But amazing trial design makes good medicines come through successfully.
I understand that from the data perspective, but
Mm,
how do I put it into my head from the ethical and biochemistry situation? Like things
mm.
can work for solving an issue, or things cannot work for solving an issue. But the probability that it will solve my issue is dictated by how the trials were done. I
I
It
know
seems to
that's
be
that kind of
not the same thing.
Yeah, totally. And it kind of doesn't actually make a lot of sense, but that's actually what tends to happen. So you could have a drug which is, oh my God, the most amazing thing ever, will cure cancer tomorrow, but a crappy trial design still means that drug will fail. Um, Having said that, if the drug doesn't work, an amazing trial does not mean it will succeed. But you want a good drug or good therapy with a great trial, and those two together will maximize the chance of success. So like a couple of simple examples. So there was a public listed company in Australia, Neuron. They did a rare condition, neuro disease for kids. We thought their trial was actually really badly designed because they had 11 patients. And all 11 patients, they told them that they were getting the active drug. There were no placebos, so there's no masking, which is just generally bad, and that reduces your probability of success. And these were self-reported outcomes from parents. So parent would tell the doctor, hey, yes, this drug has worked. My kid is better. My kid is not better. We actually gave the trial like a 20% chance of success because, hey, that's probably not going to work. They announced their trial succeeded because 9 out of 11 parents said their kids got better. Um, Now, you'd say, awesome, that trial succeeded. The model was wrong, but it was only it was 11 patients, nine said it. It was self reported. There's no masking. Everybody knew that they were getting the drug. There was no placebo. There's no control arm. So that trial does not actually tell you whether that drug is actually going to work properly or not. It's just kind of said in this very narrow area, it kind of maybe kind of does work or does something. But a really good trial with 100 patients and a blinded and a placebo and a control group and all those kind of things would have actually given more validity to that trial.
I totally understand that because
Mm,
it's very logical, and with the placebo effect being like scientifically proven, how can
mm.
you hold any trial without a placebo group and a blind test? I don't know.
So here's what we do. So the brilliance of
Why
our
was
model
the
is,
test valid in this example?
well, they announce it as valid and they've announced it as success, but we didn't buy shares in that company, and the shares in that company did not go up because even though they announced it as success, I think the medical community, the chief medical officers, did not actually totally believe it. But the cool thing that we'll do in our model is we'll tell you if you go for for blinded, which means you have a placebo and control group or double or triple masking, whatever level you want to go for, versus open label, we'll tell you that will actually increase your chance of success by 17%. We'll tell you specifically for that phase and that condition, each of these things that you could change in the trial, what impact that actually has. So it actually gives clinicians an insane amount of data and kind of decisioning that they can do to really kind of optimize their trial. Like another common one is like patient numbers. So it's kind of funny. If you have too many patients, it's harder to manage, harder to control, more chance of adverse impacts. If you don't have enough, you might not get statistical significance. So there's a sweet spot in the middle. And that sweet spot is different for every single condition and is different for every single phase. And all we've done is figured out in the data what is that parabola for every single condition. Something that was actually completely not known before we had done it. They used to use mathematical models to try to guess, variances and those kind of things. But now all this actually is known and exists, and now you can actually design a better trial with the optimal number of patients and sites and locations and doctors that you just couldn't do before.
Can you tell me about the significance of your offering for the businesses that you work with? For example, I know
Hmm.
that FDA for US is very long and difficult process, and it takes years FDA approval for the new drugs in the US. And you are an Australian company. What
Yeah.
kind of market that you are targeting, and what improvement you think that you can give to the process?
Totally. So all of our data is actually based on the FDA data because almost everybody globally registers their trials with clinicaltrials.gov, which feeds into the FDA process. So most of our clients are pharmaceutical companies that are designing trials. And generally with our model, we can often increase their probability of success by 30%. And often we can actually make their trial more economical to run because we can actually pull down parameters. Like often people will over recruit. So we can actually help them recruit less and save a whole bunch of money, or we can help them pick which site or which hospitals to use, because some hospitals are just better at different phases and different conditions. So we'll do all these little nuancy changes to give them the greatest chance of success. And what that means that their trials end up becoming a bit of a meritocracy. That sometimes you can't do every trial that you want to do. So we'll help them figure out which ones are most likely to succeed so they can double down and really invest heavily in those ones. So it's almost a bit Darwinian. It helps them cull out the ones that will probably not succeed and they should not probably invest a lot of money in.
I get it. So it's more about resource allocation and helping the companies prioritize and be very
Totally.
strategic about what things they can actually pursue, because trials cost a lot of money, and
Yep.
they going into the trials in the position where they can lose. And
Yeah.
if your data can suggest that they will lose before they go in there, means a huge budget cuts. Cool. That sounds good.
Yeah.
And
I
what
mean,
about the
basically what it
geography
does.
of the companies that you work with?
Yeah, so I mean, our first set of customers are in Australia, just because that's where we are. That's where we've been talking to the people the most. Hopefully, gonna get our first set of European customers pretty soon, and hopefully the American ones sometime later on this year. Just the other thing on that last point as well is basically what we do is we make it look like a perfect economy, like a perfect market with near complete information. So you can actually make a really good informed financial decision about these trials before they start or before they finish. The other thing as well, so what we did for another company recently is they were going through their capital raise to try to raise more funds. So we did a report from them, said, awesome, your trial is 72% chance of success. Here are all your competitors. And these are when your competitors are going to complete their trials. And these are your competitors' chance of success as well. And so theoretically, over time, these guys will get more money allocated to them. So it will end up becoming like a real meritocracy. So the best companies, the best trials will succeed. They'll get the funding, and the badly designed ones, the one less likely to succeed, will probably not get as much funding.
Hmm. It will go through all the players in the economy getting access to better information.
Exactly. Hmm.
You being a person in this company for 9 months, do you
Yeah. So I
already
started.
have
Oh, go on.
have a position on this dilemma in the pharmaceutical world about disease treatment versus disease prevention?
Well, so I've only this is my first medtech business I've ever been involved in. Funnily enough, when I did my uni thesis, I was doing my software engineering degree. I did it in neural networks. It wasn't called AI back then, and it was all about predicting what factors lead to cancer with about 50 variables like weights and genetics and all those kind of things. And I built a machine learning model. This was probably 20 years ago when you had to hand code everything in Java, 70,000 lines of code, and 6 months later, it kind of worked, and it worked quite well. Only got about 50% accuracy, but that was pretty amazing in those days. So that's my affinity with why I found this super interesting. I was super excited to work with these guys. Now, when it comes to disease treatment versus prevention, ideally, prevention is cheaper than treatment, but not so much involved in this company. This company, it's all about the treatment side of things.
Well, we cannot say that that side of the question is not
We
useful.
need both.
Yeah.
Oh, totally, totally. It's totally useful, but it's just something that we aren't solving in this company.
What did drive you in the first place on this career of uh, s- working with data and going into software engineering?
Software engineering, it was kind of by chance. My dad was a computer guy. I did well in the HSC, which is like the entrance exam for university here. Had choice of most topics. I was already doing my first tech startup when I started in 10th grade holidays. Was running that all through about up to for about 5 years through about 30 university. So it's almost like preordained that I'll become a technology person. And software engineering at University of New South Wales had the highest entrance mark, so I ended up doing that. So there was actually no great insight. It was just kind of by chance. My dad was a computer guy. We got our first computer at home back in like 1986 kind of thing, and they've just always been around and always been a part of what I do.
I see.
Hmm.
One thing that I really wanted to ask you from the marketing and branding perspective, I like how you position your unique spot between technology, commercialization, and people
Hmm.
management. And
Yeah.
I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, oh, all right, but there is like technology, sales, people, and
Hmm.
this approach where you rather use the word commercialization, I understand that it is deliberate. I understand
Yeah.
that it highlights in in a better way what you do, and most importantly for whom you are doing it. So it has the mark of people who
Hmm.
you want to talk to in the choice of this word.
Yep.
Would you talk about it?
Very observant. Yeah, totally. I mean, sales is a very very small subset of commercialization. It's like saying running is different to exercise, right? Or running is different to fitness. Yeah, it's kind of part of it, but it's a small part of it. Commercialization is much more than sales. It's marketing, it's branding, it's pricing, figuring out who your customer is, who your competitors are, and bundling that all into a coherent strategy so you can generate cash. So you can figure out who's actually going to pay for your product, so you can survive and then continue investing in it.
Yeah, I see. So because it's more, yes, it's more investory. It's more about the going into the market
Mm.
using your expertise. It's not selling your product or selling
Yeah.
the idea. It's about opening the market and
Yep.
finding the success in there.
Yeah.
I really like
Spot on.
this move.
Spot on. Well, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Alex. It's been fantastic chatting to you.
Likewise, thank you for
Hmm.
sharing your story, and yeah, my pleasure.
Uh, awesome. Great. Thank you very much.
Alrighty,
Thanks. See you. Bye bye.
bye bye.